I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I still remember the way it all started, how slowly it crept into my life. It wasn't as though there were alarms blaring or flashing lights, no, it was the subtle things. First, it was the long hours she'd spend at work, her typical, client dinners, turning into late nights and team-building weekends. It was easy to brush off at first. I wanted to believe she was dedicated, committed to climbing the corporate ladder just like I had. We'd built everything together over the last decade, our home, our life, and the trust we'd given each other without question. But in reality, that trust was turning into a game she thought she could play without consequences. The real wake-up call came during what was supposed to be a simple, quiet vacation. We had planned a trip to the mountains, something we hadn't done in years. With my work projects piling up, I'd finally taken time off just for her, hoping it might bring us back to the way we were. But even on vacation, she was glued to her phone. At first, it was emails, work updates, even what she claimed were company surveys. But when she sprinted out of the Wawa just because she'd left her phone on the seat, that's when I knew something was wrong. The way she flew back, nearly ripping the door off, her face flushed and panicked, it didn't make sense. Why would someone act like that if they had nothing to hide? As we sat by the lake that evening, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness building up. Watching her from across the campfire, I couldn't help but feel like she was a stranger. She looked at me as though everything was normal, like nothing had changed. But it wasn't her warmth I felt, it was her distance. And still, I pushed it aside, refusing to entertain the thought that maybe I wasn't the only man in her life. Back at home, life settled back into its usual rhythm, yet there was a new layer to it, a constant, nagging feeling in my gut. She was so often out, working late, or meeting clients. One night, after I'd put the kids to bed, I decided to check our phone records. I wasn't proud of myself for doing it, but something told me I had to know. And there it was, a number that popped up more frequently than any other. A number with a Virginia area code, one that appeared almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day, during her supposed work hours. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another coworker. I knew better than to confront her without evidence, so I kept it quiet. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she wouldn't betray me like this. But I had to be sure. I stayed up late that night, running that Virginia number through every search tool I could find. I even called the number once, just to see if a voicemail would confirm my suspicions, but it was no use. The number was a VoIP, untraceable, a ghost line. My heart sank further. The next morning, I decided to confront her with something more subtle. As she poured her coffee, I asked, "How's work been? Seems like you've been really busy lately." She glanced up, surprised. "Oh, yeah. We've got a huge project with a new client. They're pretty high maintenance, so it's been a lot of late nights." She didn't miss a beat. Her lie was seamless, woven with just enough details to make it sound real. But I could feel the distance in her voice, the rehearsed words. She wasn't slipping up. Not yet. That weekend, I resolved to keep digging. I started by watching for any signs that she was lying or slipping up. Each time she left for another client dinner, I took mental notes, cataloging her excuses, the times she left, the way she dressed. I noticed how she'd spend extra time fixing her hair, putting on the kind of makeup she used to save for our date nights. It was subtle, but it was there. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, watching her from a distance, questioning every little thing I'd once trusted without a second thought. The final push came one evening when she was supposedly staying late for a work dinner. I decided to go for a drive, just to clear my head, maybe figure out what I would do if my suspicions were true. As I drove through town, I spotted her car in a hotel parking lot. My heart stopped. I parked a block away, hoping she wouldn't notice my car if she happened to come outside. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe her in the lobby, picking up a client for dinner, but instead, there she was, walking out with a man I'd never seen before. She was laughing, touching his arm like he was her closest friend. I didn't confront her. Not then. I just sat in my car, watching as they walked toward the restaurant next to the hotel, arm in arm, laughing like a couple on their first date. It hit me then that this wasn't just a fling, she'd built an entire life behind my back. The betrayal was deeper than I'd feared. I'd never seen that look on her face when she was with me, that look of unrestrained happiness, unfiltered excitement. My entire world shifted in that moment, the weight of 1,000 little betrayals collapsing into a single, gut-wrenching realization: she had chosen him over me, over our life, over our kids. I drove home in silence, numb, unable to process the full scope of what I'd just seen. The house felt empty when I returned, the echoes of laughter from our family dinners, movie nights, and lazy Sundays filling the quiet like ghosts. I felt a surge of anger, the kind that burned hot and fast, but beneath it was something colder, a resolve that I'd never known I had. I knew I had to be smart about this. Losing my temper, confronting her in a rage, wouldn't get me anywhere. If I was going to deal with this, I had to do it on my terms. I spent the next few days planning, making sure everything would be in place for what would come next. I made calls, gathered records, collected every piece of evidence I could find. If she wanted to play games, then I'd make sure she didn't get to rewrite the rules. That night was the hardest one yet. I barely slept, going over everything I'd just witnessed at the hotel, her laughing, touching some other man as though he were her world. The look on her face was burned into my mind. Every memory we'd shared felt tainted. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, of being left out of the life I'd thought we were building together. It was as if I'd been living a lie, one she had carefully constructed and hidden behind her practiced smile and polished words. But I couldn't just sit around and wallow. I had to act, not out of anger but out of the need to protect myself, and our kids. The next morning, while she was out for a work meeting, I started collecting all the pieces I'd need. I combed through our bank statements, looking for any unusual charges. I already had suspicions, but seeing them in black and white gave them weight. There were unexplained expenses, hotel bookings, restaurants in different cities, even gifts I knew weren't for me. Each line item was like a punch to the gut, confirmation of everything I'd feared. As I scanned the statements, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid. She had been using family money to fund this affair, siphoning it away from our joint account to cover her tracks. But no amount of financial sleuthing would make her admit to anything, she was too skilled at keeping up appearances. I needed more, something undeniable. When I finished with the financials, I turned to my laptop. I went through her social media, poring over her posts, her photos, even the ones she'd tagged. I clicked through every tagged name, searching for any sign of this man I'd seen her with. After scrolling for what felt like hours, I came across a picture she'd posted months ago at a work conference. In the background, faint but clear enough to identify, I saw him, the man from the hotel. He was leaning in just a little too close, his hand resting on her shoulder. In the comments, a colleague had written something that now felt like a twisted joke: "Looking cozy, you too." She'd replied with a laughing emoji, brushing it off like it was nothing. I saved the photo and kept looking, finding more subtle signs as I went along. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. The late nights, the business trips, the casual mentions of extra hours. She'd been slipping this into her life piece by piece, trusting that I wouldn't look closely enough to connect the dots. But now I could see it all so clearly, and it only fueled my resolve. After a few days, I had everything I needed: the phone records, the financial statements, the photos, and even some of the texts she hadn't been careful enough to delete. I stored it all on a drive and tucked it away, knowing that soon enough, I'd need to bring it all into the light. But I wasn't ready to confront her directly. Not yet. I wanted to be prepared, to make sure that when the moment came, she wouldn't have a single card left to play. I kept my distance, acting as normal as I could. But there was a coldness between us that even she couldn't ignore. One night over dinner, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time, concern, maybe even guilt. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft, as if she were testing the waters. "Is everything okay?" I took a moment, measuring my words carefully. "I've just been busy with work," I replied, giving her the same empty excuse she'd been feeding me for months. She nodded, her eyes searching my face for something, maybe a sign of what I knew. But I kept my mask in place, giving her nothing. She shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable. "I've been thinking, maybe we could use a weekend away. Just the two of us." The nerve of her suggestion caught me off guard. Did she really think a quick getaway would fix things? Did she believe I'd just accept her excuses and pretend everything was fine? The thought made me sick. I couldn't let her continue with her lies, couldn't let her play the doting wife while she was sneaking around with someone else. But I knew it wasn't time yet. I had to play along a little longer, let her think she was still in control. "That sounds good," I replied, forcing a smile. "Maybe after things settle down at work." She smiled back, clearly relieved. "Great. I think it'll be good for us. I feel like we've both been so busy, just drifting a little. It'll be nice to reconnect." Her words were so hollow they echoed in my mind, and I had to look away to keep my composure. I excused myself and headed to my office, closing the door behind me. Sitting at my desk, I took a deep breath, letting the frustration sink in. Every lie she told only pushed me further, fueling the need for something more than a simple confrontation. I wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal just as I had. I wanted her to experience the same sense of loss, the same hollow emptiness I felt every time I looked at her. The next few days were spent in a haze of planning, each step calculated and precise. I made sure the bank accounts were squared away, shifted our savings into an account she couldn't access. I spoke with a lawyer, going over the evidence I'd gathered and getting advice on how best to proceed. I wanted to be sure I had every angle covered, every loose end tied up before I dropped the final bombshell. She'd taken so much from me already, my trust, my peace of mind, even my pride. But I was about to take it all back. One evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, she brought up her work trip to Orlando again. "I'll be gone just a couple of days," she said, glancing at me with an odd, hesitant smile. "Just need to finalize some things with a client. I'll be back before you know it." I nodded, keeping my tone even. "I trust you. Just let me know if you need anything while you're away." She looked almost surprised, as though she hadn't expected me to be so calm. "Thank you," she murmured, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely grateful. I almost felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her gratitude. It was about setting the stage for the truth. The night before she left, I watched as she packed her suitcase, carefully arranging her clothes and toiletries. She was meticulous, folding each piece with care, choosing outfits I knew weren't meant for business meetings. As I watched her, I felt a sense of finality, knowing that this was the last time she'd be able to keep up her charade. I was done waiting, done letting her think she could control me. The next morning, I watched her drive off, her smile lingering in the rearview mirror. As soon as she was gone, I got to work, making sure every last piece of evidence was in order. By the time she returned, I'd be ready. I'd spent enough time letting her live her double life, and now, it was my turn to end it on my terms. Her absence filled the house with an eerie stillness, one that felt heavier than any silence I'd ever known. With her gone, I found myself walking through each room, seeing everything in a new light. The photos on the wall, the notes on the fridge, the little mementos of a life we'd built together, they all felt like remnants of a life I no longer recognized. The person I thought I'd shared it with had become a stranger. I spent the first day in a trance, going over my plan, making sure every piece was ready to fall into place. The lawyer had assured me everything was airtight, that I'd covered every angle. She'd have no idea what hit her, and I'd be able to walk away with everything intact. Part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, if I was letting anger cloud my judgment. But then I'd remember her laughter with him, her lies, the betrayal, and all my doubts would vanish. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. The second day, I decided to drive out to the hotel where I knew she'd be staying. I wanted to see it for myself, the place where she was carrying on her affair. It felt like a twisted pilgrimage, one that I needed to make to truly grasp the extent of her betrayal. As I drove, my mind drifted back to the years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, the life we'd built. But every memory was tainted, corrupted by the knowledge that she'd been lying to me all along. When I arrived, I parked across the street, close enough to see the entrance but far enough to go unnoticed. I watched as people came and went, wondering which of them might be him, the man she'd chosen over me. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into what felt like hours. I couldn't see her, couldn't catch a glimpse of her in the crowd, and yet I knew she was there. I knew she was inside, living out her lie with the same ease she'd shown me every day. After an hour, I turned the car around and headed back home. I'd seen enough, felt enough. This was the last time I'd waste a moment of my life on her lies. The drive home felt longer, but my mind was clearer, sharper. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Back at home, I went through every detail one last time. The bank accounts were secure, the assets protected, the custody arrangements filed. I'd even drafted a letter, a simple statement laying out everything I knew, every piece of evidence, every lie she'd told. It was a message, not just to her but to myself, a final act of closure. I printed it, folded it, and placed it on her nightstand, where she'd be sure to see it when she got back. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The weight of the last few months seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. This was it. Tomorrow, I'd be free of her, free of the lies, free of the betrayal that had hung over me like a storm cloud. And she would finally face the truth. The morning came quietly, sunlight filtering through the curtains as I woke up to a strange feeling of peace. She would be back today, and I knew that when she walked through the door, her life as she knew it would be over. I had a sense of satisfaction, knowing that this was the end of a chapter, not just for her but for me as well. Around noon, her car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window, waiting as she gathered her things and headed for the front door. She looked different somehow, more tired, maybe even a little worn. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of the old familiarity, a glimpse of the woman I'd loved for so many years. But it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of everything she'd done, and I steeled myself for what was to come. She walked in, smiling as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just spent the weekend with another man. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice bright, casual, like she was returning from any other trip. "Miss me?" I didn't respond right away, just watched her as she set down her bag and slipped off her shoes. She looked at me, waiting for a reaction, maybe expecting a warm welcome, a hug, something to reassure her that her secret was safe. "Did you have a good trip?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. She nodded, a little too quickly. "Yeah, it was productive. Lots of work, but, you know, it's good to get away every once in a while." Her words were smooth, practiced, just like all the other lies she'd fed me over the years. I nodded, gesturing toward the bedroom. "I left something for you in there. Thought you might want to take a look." She looked surprised, curious, maybe even a little nervous. But she brushed it off, heading toward the bedroom with a casual smile. I followed her, watching as she opened the door, her gaze falling on the envelope on the nightstand. She picked it up, glancing back at me with a raised eyebrow. "What's this?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "Just open it," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the doorway. She opened the envelope, her expression shifting as she read the contents. I watched her face go pale, the color draining as the reality of what she was reading sank in. Her eyes darted across the pages, widening as she took in every detail, every piece of evidence, every lie laid bare. She looked up at me, her face a mask of shock and fear. How did you?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I know everything," I said, my voice calm, steady. "The phone calls, the hotel bookings, the texts. I know about all of it." She looked like she'd been punched, her hands trembling as she clutched the letter. I can explain." "No," I cut her off. "I don't want an explanation. I don't want any more lies. This marriage is over." Her mouth opened, closed, as though she were struggling to find the right words, to somehow undo the damage she'd done. "Please," she whispered, her voice desperate. "Please, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched her unravel. "You had your chance to be honest. You chose to lie, to betray me, to betray everything we built together. This is the consequence." She sank onto the bed, her head in her hands as she started to cry. It was the first time I'd ever seen her cry like that, real tears, raw and unfiltered. Part of me wanted to feel pity, to comfort her, but I pushed the feeling aside. She hadn't shown me any mercy, and I owed her none in return. After a moment, she looked up, her face streaked with tears. Is there any way we can fix this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, resolute. "No. I've already filed for divorce. I've made sure you won't get a penny more than what you're legally entitled to. And I've arranged for full custody of the kids. You lost any right to fight for more the moment you decided to betray this family." Her face crumpled, the weight of her choices settling on her like a crushing blow. She was silent, her shoulders slumped, defeated. For a moment, we sat in that silence, the life we'd built together unraveling in the space of a few words, a few sheets of paper. Finally, she looked up at me, a hollow look in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words sounding empty, hollow. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. "I'm sure you are. But it's too late for that now." I turned and left the room, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. It was over. The life we'd built, the trust we'd shared, it was all gone, reduced to ashes. But as I walked away, I felt a sense of freedom, a lightness I hadn't known in years. I was finally free. As I closed the door on the bedroom, I felt a surge of relief, a kind of freedom that pulsed through me with each step away from her. It was over. No more lies, no more hiding, no more wondering. For the first time in months, my life was finally my own. I moved through the house, the emptiness now strangely comforting, a reminder that I was done with the charade. But the relief didn't last long. By the time I reached the kitchen, a strange unease crept over me. I poured myself a drink, sitting at the kitchen table and letting my mind wander. Despite the satisfaction of watching her facade shatter, something still gnawed at me, an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake. I'd planned every detail, accounted for every possible scenario, and yet a part of me felt strangely unsettled. I was just about to brush off the feeling when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, it was an unknown number, local. My stomach twisted. I knew that phone number. It was one I'd seen before, scattered throughout the phone records and text logs I'd uncovered. It was his number, the other man. I felt a mix of anger and curiosity, my hand shaking as I swiped to answer. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, just the faint sound of breathing. Finally, a voice spoke, deep and calm. Is this him?" My grip tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" I demanded, though I knew the answer. "You know who I am," he said. "And I know who you are. I thought maybe it was time we talked, man to man." My head was spinning. What did he want? Why was he calling me now, of all times? I took a steadying breath, trying to keep my voice even. I have nothing to say to you. It's over between you and her. She knows I've filed for divorce. He chuckled, a sound that sent a chill through me. Oh, I know. I just wanted to congratulate you on a job well done. You really covered all your bases. Bank accounts, custody, even the assets. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. A strange chill settled over me. There was something unsettling about his tone, something that felt too familiar. It was almost as though, no, that couldn't be. Why are you calling me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. To tell you that you did exactly what I hoped you'd do. He paused, and I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. You made it so easy, you know. All I had to do was lay the breadcrumbs and watch you follow them. My mind reeled, trying to process what he was saying. What are you talking about? It was all right there, wasn't it? The hotel receipts, the texts, the phone calls. I made sure you found them, just enough to make you suspicious, but not enough to confront her outright. It was like leading a dog on a leash. You wanted proof, so I made sure you found it. Realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He had set this up, every proof I'd found, every suspicious clue, it had all been planted. I'd been played, manipulated into believing the worst, into dismantling my own marriage. But why? I forced myself to speak, my voice shaky. What did you do? It's simple, really, he replied, his voice cold and measured. Your wife wasn't cheating on you. But I needed you to think she was. I needed you to tear your life apart, to ruin everything you had. And you did it beautifully. My heart pounded as the pieces started falling into place. He'd made it all up, crafted every piece of evidence to make me believe a lie. I had fallen for it, played right into his hands. But I still didn't understand why. Why would you do this? He paused, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Because you took something from me, something I valued. A promotion. An opportunity. A position I deserved. He laughed, a low, menacing sound. You didn't even know, did you? You stole it right out from under me, all those years ago. I struggled to remember, grasping for any memory that could explain his words. Then it hit me, a promotion from years back, one I'd barely thought about, a stepping stone in my career. I'd been chosen over a few others, but I'd never known the names of those who'd lost out. And now, somehow, this man had held on to that grudge, long enough to destroy my life as revenge. So you ruined my marriage, over a promotion? I could barely believe the words even as I said them. He laughed again, a sound filled with cold satisfaction. Not just a promotion. A life, an entire career trajectory. You destroyed my future, so I returned the favor. I felt a wave of nausea, my mind racing with the weight of everything I'd done, every step I'd taken to unravel my life because of a lie. I wanted to scream, to hurl the phone across the room, to do anything to undo the damage. But it was too late. I had already torn everything apart, and there was no going back. As I sat there, numb, staring into the empty room that had once felt like a home, his final words echoed in my mind, each one a nail in the coffin of the life I'd lost. Goodbye, and good luck putting it all back together. You're going to need it. The line went dead, leaving me alone in the silence of a life I had unknowingly destroyed.